So I came across a video this week, and it's from a creator that I really admire and I really enjoy watching their videos. And this creator was mentioned last stream when we talked about, I think it was free will. We mentioned free will quickly. And Alex O'Connor from Cosmic Skeptic was mentioned, and we talked briefly about him. And in his he made a community post that I read, and Alex has been a. By the way, I want to preface this by saying Alex made a video about drama, basically, and he said he didn't want to do this and he didn't want people to add to this, but this is the internet, and I don't want to contribute to the drama. I don't want to contribute to the story. I'll reference to it for context, but I want to talk about more the lessons that we can learn from this story, and it's something that I want to do more on this on these streams. It's not contributing to like events, like not commenting on events and all that, but what lessons can we learn from them? So the context is Alex O'Connor is a vegan activist. He was more on the atheist side of YouTube. He studies theology at Oxford, or studied, I don't know if he's done. And he turned a lot of his focus and attention to veganism and animal rights, the animal rights movement. And he made a lot of videos, a lot of debates, conversations that I found really, truly fascinating. I can talk about my relationship to like my veganism or my vegetarianism or my meat eating habits later. But to end the context, he made a community post saying that for various reasons, he can't continue doing a vegan diet. And I don't remember the community post, but from what I remember, he didn't go too much into details. Maybe he did because it was a very long community post. But he basically said, I can't do it anymore. I'm sorry. He felt really bad about it, obviously, as an animal rights activist. And he said he's still like 100% behind the idea of factory farming being bad and all that, but he just can't have a vegan diet anymore for health reasons. And I thought it was, and he also said that he regretted, what he regretted is the idea that a lot of people relied on him to turn vegan, and in his information about adopting a vegan diet, and he felt bad, obviously, for preaching something that he can't uphold himself, and for health reasons. And it's not health reasons caused by the vegan, by his vegan diet. It's health reasons that he had prior to the vegan diet, and that the vegan diet kind of made it unsustainable. But all that to say, he got really, really bad comments from people who are vegans. People saying, like not death threats, but like in that ballpark of death threats, which was like absolutely disgusting to see. And if you know Alex, if you see if you saw his video that he published, if you saw his community post or whatever, send him like a support message. Like I think it's important. Like he got support messages, but he also got bad messages. If I put myself in his place, I'd like some support messages. As content creators, we find ourselves often seeing bad messages, or overwhelmingly, it only takes one terrible message to destroy your day, and that's what happened. Many terrible messages actually happened, and he talks in the video about him suffering with from issues of mental health, and of course this health deteriorating from his vegan diet. So for the context, that's it, and I don't want to add more, and I don't want to talk about Alex more than that, because I know a lot of people were angry at him. And if you are angry at someone who says they're a vegan and they say they can't be a vegan anymore because of diet, and it gets you angered, please don't direct it at him. And we'll talk about that. And just to preface this, I'm not a vegan. I am against the treatment of animals and the factory farming of animals. The reason why I'm against it is not for ethical purposes, and we can get into that, but in another video. This video is not about that. I'll talk about that later, but I'm not against animal factory farming for ethical reasons, but for environmental reasons. I think it's one of the reasons, factory farming of animals is in such a way to global warming that it needs to be stopped. But I don't see anything like if it's an ethical quandary, it's because it's leading to the death of of our planet and of our ecology. All that being said, the lessons I want to take away from this situation with Alex O'Connor is that how do you build movements, and around which premises and which values do you want to build your political movement around? So what we have here is an animal rights movement of we'll call it the vegan movement, and the vegan movement is primarily a political movement. Some would say it's a moral movement or an ethical movement, but I would characterize it as a political movement, mostly because, well, every political movement is a moral movement. Any politics has an ethical framework backing it. For animal rights, it's the same thing. When we talk about a movement, let's say animal rights, it's all about using power to, well, for the case of animals, to reduce factory farming and to abolish it, perhaps. And all that said, because it's a political movement, but it's so deeply intertwined with ethics and morality, you get into some muddy territory. I'll give you an example, like something that's parallel to that. Take for example children working in a factory in a developing country. This is deeply unethical. It's immoral. We are against that. I hope everybody in chat is against children working in factories, and being exploited in those factories to make t-shirts or whatever. And if we were to make a movement around that question, it would be a political movement for sure, but with ethical, with ethical underlyings. The problem, if we were to make that movement, I believe we should do it pragmatically and do it around more political arguments than moral ones. And it might sound weird to say. For example, I want to give you we can use as a tactic, as a movement, the idea that using children to make as cheap labor is bad, and obviously we shouldn't do it. And here are the benefits of not using children as cheap labor, and what are the causes of us using children as cheap labor? What are the consequences of using children as cheap labor? And all these things, a more pragmatic and a more, and you can do direct action toward around that and all of that. But, and the reason why I'm using these examples is because I want to contrast it to using child labor to guilt people. And if I guilt people saying that t-shirt that you're wearing is a product of child labor and therefore the blood is on your hands. And then we show people videos of, children working in terrible conditions. That might work. And that's what I want to discuss with all of you, is that might work, but it might also have consequences, because we're tying it less to the political arguments and going more into the passionate, let's say, moral arguments or the guilting arguments, which makes for a movement that is less focused on political efficacy to actually change the world, but more focused on the morality of people's choices. I think that's the best way to put it. So I'll give you an example. For example, veganism, instead of talking about the points as for why vegan animal cruelty is bad and how it's destroying the world and how we could install alternatives, which alternatives can we have, blah blah blah. People might not even listen to you, but that's part of advocating for change. It might be a good shock therapy. It might be shocking to show animal cruelty and show people this is what you're contributing to. But the flip side of that is you might alienate a lot of people. It might work as well. But also you're tying their individual habits and you're moralizing their individual habits, which not only can be hurtful to the movement in terms of alienating people from your movement, but it can also alienate people within your movement from each other. So Alex O'Connor is one of the examples of that. Alex O'Connor says, I can't be a vegan anymore. I'm sorry, guys. It's been taking a toll on my personal life, my mental health, my physical health, and I can't do it anymore. And if you were a pragmatic, because it's not the idea of being too radically for animals' rights or whatever. It's more of a matter of being pragmatic. A pragmatic movement would say, hey, listen, Alex, no problem, like you're still advocating for for animal rights. He also advocates for human rights, but you're still advocating for animal rights. You're still denouncing factory farming. You're still advocating for a vegan diet, just saying for you it's really hard and it's not, it's not the best. It's not like you're going to eat meat all the time. I imagine you're still going to reduce your meat consumption. You're doing the best you can to make this world a better place for animals and a better place for us. But if your movement is not based on pragmatism or based on these political or policy oriented framework, and you're more on the guilting and in that action, you might turn against people who actually fight or who actually think who actually agree with you. And that's the case for Alex. People have been, telling him to commit, to go to use some other streamer's expression, to find the closest manhole and jump in that sewer and do some sewer sliding. Some people have told him that he betrayed the movement. Some people say that he betrayed animals, and that if animals could have, given agency, they would want to off him, which is like really, really bad. And what you're doing here is that you're showing that your movement or what you're advocating for is not politically inclined. It's not in terms of like changing the world in a movement that can be inclusive and that can gain power with other people. You're just showing that, you're just making, showing your morality or using that movement as a statement of your own, moral virtues. Because a lot of the screenshots he shared of the comments that were sent to him, you can tell some of them, at least one of them that I saw, had ACAB on it. So I imagine it's a leftist, and veganism in general is more of a leftist movement. And because of that, I worry about that because, if we want, for example, to abolish child labor, we won't start outing each other for wearing, things that were made possibly by child, from child labor. So it's deeply unproductive. And when it comes to learning lessons from that, I think we should just learn lessons that, first, individual actions have little consequences. I think, for example, Alex's advocacy for animal rights have done so much more than his refusal to eat animal products. And even if he does eat animal products, he's doing a lot more than many vegan activists who just don't eat animal products and don't have his platform. It's not their fault, but at the same time, he has that platform and is using it to advocate for animal rights. He's doing a lot for that movement, and a lot of them are excising him for it. It's really bad. So yeah, the lessons, using, like, if we want to build movements, we build them pragmatically, and if we want to use techniques to shame people away from whatever, diversity tactics, you can do it, but we have to be careful of not being so emotionally involved in it that we start turning on ourselves, because that can be really harmful, not only to the movement, but to the image of the movement, which is super important as well. So, solidarity with Alex. I don't know what his political inclinations are. I mean, if you're a vegan, I feel like you might be a bit more of a leftist, at very least a liberal. But yeah, I want to know what you guys think about, not about veganism, but about building a movement more based, like, less judgment, more convincing arguments, says Lise Tessier. And I agree with that. Yeah. Do you think that judging people can be a good way of convincing others? I think it's not. but at the same time, maybe it is. Yeah, Sauerkraut says antagonizing people is the best way to lose support. And I agree with that because for veganism, I don't think you should antagonize people. You might, give arguments, but trying to shame them and saying you're contributing to, this agony that animals are suffering from is not necessarily the best way of going about it. But also, like, for example, if I was to try to convince a rich person to become an anarchist, which is absolutely possible, right? Or at least become a leftist. Kropotkin was super rich. Engels was super rich. There's so many people. Like Marx, like maybe he wasn't rich, but like he had a PhD, so he was privileged in a way, right? Not a lot of, struggling working class people in the 1800s had PhDs. But yeah, all that to say, I would probably gesture at how, an anti-capitalist society can actually help the rich, not antagonizing them, because they're also the product of their environment and a product of the systems of incentives that they live within, but saying, for example, a lot of the crime that you're so afraid of, right? All this gun violence that you hear on the news, a good way of stopping that, and you would argue that a society with less gun violence and less violence in general would be better. A good way to to disincentivize these social issues is to get rid of the profit motive and get rid of the fact that people, incentives of greed that encourage this kind of violence. And that's capitalism. And that's just an example. There's many ways of trying to convince people without antagonizing them. If you can do it for the rich with anti-capitalism, also another good way with anti-capitalism with the rich is to say, or helping the third, I don't want to say third world, developing world, is to say, listen, if the developing world has more resources and more wealth, you have literally billions of people who can have access to higher education. That's more people to work on, cancer research or finding, ways of mitigating cancer. That's more people to find, to do so much innovation, so many people to do new movies, new art, new music. When you give resources to people, and not just education, but just more resources, more free time for these people, giving free time to people who otherwise wouldn't have it, then you're enabling them from to have to contribute to society, which in return will contribute to your own happiness. Anyway, all that to say, all that to answer to Sauerkraut's comment, antagonizing people is the best way to lose support. Hawk, I need to. Hawk says, you are on point. Being constructive and pragmatic is important. I care about the environment, but those people blocking roads make me want to burn tires. I think there's a difference though between blocking roads and guilting people. I do think that civil disobedience and civil perturbation, shaking people or disrupting daily life through actions can actually be good and be a good way to get heard and all that, without necessarily telling people that they're in the wrong. It's just saying trying to shake them up. I don't think it's a necessarily bad thing. It's been done very often in historically. Paige says, shame is a tricky thing, makes for hypocrisy for forbidden fruit as a side effect. Yeah, and arguments from hypocrisy are terrible arguments. It's shame. I don't think is a good way, but I think it's one of the big tactics of veganism, and I think it can be done differently. I think it can be done better. And anyway, yeah, Panos says, I would love to be a vegetarian in the future. And that's the kind of attitude that we should embrace, instead of saying, well, if you're saying that you'd like to be a vegetarian but not a vegan, you're actually contributing to I don't know, chickens being encaged for your eggs, and and cows being not seeing the light of day for your milk. You know, there's always a way of guilting people, and like Panos, for example, wanting to be a vegetarian. You can still, like, you know, say, well, you're a hypocrite for not, you know, for not being a vegan. It's not super helpful. Yeah, that is. I'm happy to get anti-fantastique the comment by him or by them. I used to be an angry vegan, so I totally get why vegans judge others for eating meat. If you suddenly understand how brutal all this is, you get emotional. It's almost a form of secondhand trauma. Yeah, I like I understand that, and I like there are reasons why a lot of vegans get like really angry, and that has to be understood as well. Anti-fantastique is telling us that. I think it's easy to get emotional and get carried away in that way, and it's like, because you can also get really emotional about climate change. You can get emotional about like human rights abuses and stuff like that, and that for human rights abuses and climate change, people will like agree with you and will understand your emotional like outrage. For animal eating though, I feel like you have to be extra pragmatic because people are not going to get your emotional investment as easily or as intuitively. It's definitely interesting. I understand like the emotional involvement, especially when not only do you witness so much violence, and you never get desensitized by it because you're so involved in it, but at the same time you can't let that not ruin your movement, but like harm the movement. Personally, like I try to reduce my meat intake. We eat like maybe meat once a week. We still eat eggs, but we don't really eat dairy products, mostly because Bali is lactose intolerant. I hope that's not too much detail. DDoSing Bali. Yeah, Mikey says, I do think antagonizing people could have its benefits. Societal pressure is a powerful tool. Yeah, I do also agree with that. That's the thing. But I think you have to make people understand why it's wrong to kill animals, and a lot of people, at least intuitively, don't get it.